Let's go ahead and go over the 5 best opening traps in the French defense, which happens after these first moves. And here I'm going to show you the first trap that was used against Magnus Carlsen, and he was actually trapped, and that is not even the worst part of the story, but you'll get to know it in just a moment. Here white played knight to f3, black played bishop d6. By the way, before we go into the trap, let me just explain why black plays here bishop to d6, because you may wonder why not knight to f6, why not playing symmetrically. Even though, let me take this move back, of course black can potentially play knight f6, and that is okay. In this case though, in some variations white would put this pin on black's knight, and it is slightly unpleasant. Okay, so if we go back here and we'll take a look at the black's move bishop d6. Here the idea of black is that if white plays bishop d3, instead of playing knight to f6, black is going to go knight to e7, so they don't have to worry about this pin with the bishop anymore. And also the move knight to e7 prepares black's move bishop f5, which eliminates the white d3 bishop, which is a strong attacking piece. And after black uses this setup, he's absolutely fine here, alright? So this is the black's idea. Now let's take a move back here and see what else can white play here. So we're taking the move back, and instead of going bishop to d3, white goes pawn to c4. Looks like a standard development move. Perhaps white is going to attack the center, following up with knight to c3, so black goes knight to e7 according to their plan. But all of a sudden, instead of the move like knight to c3, pressuring the black center, white goes pawn to c5, and black finds himself in a big trouble because the bishop on d6 is trapped, and so black is losing a piece for nothing, and it's time to resign. And here's a really funny thing. I just opened this position in a game database of Lichess, which is one of the top game servers for playing Blitz. And look at this, top games played in this position. And if you look at the top 2 games, they're played by black by Dr. Nichterstein, which is the nick of Magnus Carlsen. So funnily enough, not only he was trapped this way, but he was trapped twice, once in 2020 and once in 2021. Therefore, this trap really works. And if you ever happen to encounter Carlsen, feel free to play this trap against him, and after that, feel free to say this. Let's move on to the trap number 2, also a pretty interesting one. It's also interesting that when I checked it in the game database, it happened a couple times and only occasionally white found the correct move, which actually wins the game. So here one of the main moves for black is bishop going to b4. And at this point, the main move for white is pushing the pawn forward, which leads to a very complicated positional game, but there is also another variation, knight goes to e2. It temporarily sacrifices the pawn on e4, but white hopes to get it back. Right here, he goes pawn to a3. Notice that he can't take here the pawn right away because the knight is pinned, and therefore white has to kick this bishop away first of all. And here, if black wants to keep the pawn, they would have to take the knight. And after white recaptures, now white is ready to grab the pawn, so black played knight f6 to protect it. White played bishop g5, this time pinning black's knight, and so white is ready to grab the pawn on the next move. Thus black played knight c6, another natural development move. This time he's putting pressure onto the white's pawn on d4, so he's counter-attacking. White used the similar idea on the queen side, playing bishop b5, pinning the black's queenside knight this time, so it's pinned down to the black's king, and therefore black decided to castle to release the knight. Now white traded this knight off, and he could capture the pawn on e4, taking advantage of the pin. At first it looks like everything's just great for white, and only not a high-class player would go for this position playing black. But it's not actually the case, because they go queen to d5, and that is the black's hope here. This move puts pressure onto the white's knight and the bishop, and all of a sudden it looks like the situation can be really bad for white. Just think about this. If he, let's say, takes the knight on f6, then black takes the knight on e4 first with the check, and after that wins the bishop on f6, thus winning the game. Therefore, you can see that the white's position is actually quite critical here. Let's take one move back here. Therefore, in order to save the white's minor pieces, white would have to take on f6 with the knight actually. Knight takes f6. And here after pawn takes, bishop takes, queen takes g2. That was the line black was hoping for. In this position, he's obviously attacking the white's rook on h1. And if the rook goes to, let's say, rook f1, which is the only move for the rook, black goes bishop to a6, so that now the rook is under the double attack of the black's queen and the bishop, and therefore black is probably winning here. So that is the line which black calculated, hoping to counter-trick white and win the game this way. So let's take a move back right here. And now I'd like to ask you to think about this position, because several players playing this position as white could not find the winning move, and I'd like to challenge you to do that. So think about this, and if you can find the right move for white here, write it down in the comments below. Let's see if you can do it. The next trap is going to be for black, so that we know that black also has a lot of interesting resources here. Again, one of the main lines for white is going pawn to e5. Nimzovich, one of the famous players of the past, was the great advocate of this move. Black played pawn to c5, and in this game they played queen b6 first, and after that knight c6. Usually they go knight c6 first, but it doesn't matter, it transposes into the same position. In this position, white goes bishop to d3, which is already the first trap, which you gotta be aware of. Hopefully you are already, but if not, let me just mention that black can't capture this poisoned pawn on d4, as if they are induced to do that, then after this massive exchange on d4, it's not that black just won the pawn, because white has bishop b5, discover check, and he grabs the black's queen on the next move. Therefore, that is definitely not an option for black. Let's take a few moves backward. We just analyzed that taking this pawn is not an option for black, it loses the queen at the end of the line, and most players are actually aware of this trap. But there is another cool thing here. You can go bishop d7, therefore the bishop now covers the king, and this discover check in the following variation, which we just analyzed, is impossible anymore, and therefore at this point black actually is threatening to win the pawn. How can white possibly protect it? He cannot move the bishop from c1 here, because in this case black would take the pawn here on b2 and also attack the rook. Therefore, white cannot protect it with the bishop. What else can they do? Well, they have to move the bishop away, playing bishop c2 so that the white's queen is now protecting the pawn. But in this case, here's an interesting thing. Instead of playing some normal development move, you can play more aggressively and go knight to b4, trying to win this bishop. And normally bishop is actually stronger than a knight, and therefore normally white tries to avoid this exchange. And if they go bishop b3, hoping that, okay, I'm gonna go a3 and kick this knight away in the next move, you say not so fast, and you play queen a6. It is actually the key move here in this position, which gives black certain advantage, sometimes pretty huge advantage actually. The idea here is that now the knight is ready to jump to d3, and it is a really powerful threat. That is why we needed the queen here, so that it supports the black's attack along this diagonal. Therefore, if white just plays some neutral move, let's say knight of c3, and actually it's the most played move here in this position, but it's losing. In this case, black just goes knight d3 check, and white is losing. So this is check to the king. It also attacks the pawn on f2, so the king probably has to protect it, but if it does, then let's say if it goes king to f1 or king to e2, it doesn't matter, you can at least grab the bishop on c1, which is check to the white's king, and therefore you won this bishop for nothing. And again, it's time to resign. Now let's take a few moves back here and check what happened in this game. In this game, white probably calculated this line, and then he realized that he's losing the bishop at the end of the line. Therefore, he decided, okay, let me move this bishop away immediately so that I can't lose it. But in this case, black still played knight to d3, king played to e2, and here black changed the angle of his attack, playing knight f4, king goes to e3 or e1, doesn't matter, knight takes g2, checkmate. The next trap is one of my most favorite ones against the French defense. I actually executed it myself more than once. And the fun thing is that even strong players fall into this trap, because here it just goes so smoothly. And it happens in this line where black takes an e4, known as the Rubinstein variation. And before we go into this trap, let me just make also the quick announcement that if you want to know how to advance yourself to a stronger level so that you can beat more experienced opponents, not just in a single game with the help of a certain trap, but on a more regular basis, then you can click the link below the video and enroll into the course The Secrets of Strong Players, where I'm sharing with you specifically what those differences of more advanced players are, so that you know exactly the skills that you need to master in order to narrow the gap between where you are right now and where you want to be, what your chess goals are. And of course, you'll get access to our close community, support from me, from other students, so that we make sure that you get the most out of this course. Alright, let's continue with the trap. White recaptures the pawn here, black goes knight to d7, which is the main move, so it prepares development of the other knight. white goes knight f3, black continues with knight to f6, you trade the knights there on f6, and after that you play bishop d3, black goes bishop to e7. The moves of the both sides are just so natural. You go bishop g5, developing the bishop, black castles, and at this point you play queen to e2. And this move, which looks like just a normal development move, preparing castling queenside, in fact sets a clever trap. Because in this case, it's time for black to develop their light squared bishop, right? And developing it to d7 looks passive, it just shut down the black queen behind the bishop, and therefore black certainly wants to play b6 instead, so the bishop can be developed to this long diagonal, right? It looks a lot more profitable for black here. But in this case, the trick is, instead of doing this queenside castling, you can just take on f6, and after that, you go queen e4, which is a double attack to the checkmate, and the rook on a8. And even though the trap looks very easy when you're aware of it, in fact the previous black's moves are so natural, and the trap is a bit hidden because it looks like white were just developing their pieces. And therefore a lot of players, including really strong ones, were losing the games just like that. And just to show you the real power of this opening trap, I've opened once again the game database, and here you can see some games played up to this position where white is obviously winning. And here you can see players, with the black players, with a rating of 3000, 2900, 2800, 2800 again. So like extremely strong players, grandmaster level players are trapped this way. The next trap is also really interesting and tricky. Well, I guess all the traps are. Anyway, white goes knight to d2, which is one of the main lines, known as the Tarrasch variation. The white's idea here is that if black goes bishop b4, at this point it makes no sense at all, because you can always kick it away by playing pawn to c3. That's why white played knight to d2 and not to c3. Well, this is just some abstract information. The main move for black here is pawn to c5. And in this case, you can play pawn to c3, protecting the pawn. It's not the main line, but on the other hand, you drag your opponent into an unknown territory, therefore increasing the chances for him or her to make a mistake. Here black decides to isolate your central pawn on d4, and after that playing bishop to d7 so that the bishop is ready to be delivered to this open, powerful diagonal. You go knight to f3, bishop goes to c6, attacking the knight, so you play bishop d3, black goes knight f6. The black's play is both positional and aggressive, and therefore even strong players play like that as black. Here after you take on f6, black recaptures, and at first it looks like white can just win the game by playing bishop g5. But it's not that easy, because black certainly calculated this possibility, and they were hoping for the counter blow with bishop takes f3, which is also an attack of the white's queen, and simultaneously the black's queen is ready to grab that bishop on g5. And therefore, with the help of this counter blow, black is actually hopes to win the game. For example, if let's say white captures the queen, black takes here on d1, and if we just finalize this line, you can see that at the end, black just has the extra knight, and therefore it's clearly winning for black. Therefore, let's take a few moves back here. Prior to white decided to take the black's queen on f6, letting black to win, he has actually another move which is certainly way more powerful. It's the move queen to c1, and it's the move that is so easy to overlook because white rarely goes queen d1 to c1. It's kind of an awkward move, but just in this particular position it simply works. Here's the thing, from here the queen protects the bishop, and therefore it still attacks the black's queen and it's going to capture it. And if the queen goes to d4, because that's actually the only square for the queen to go to, now you can see the other idea behind the move queen c1. All of a sudden it can go inside queen c8, delivering checkmate on the next move. So it's a pretty interesting tactical shot for white, and also quite hidden combination that is so easy for black to overlook. Now, of course, there are some other traps as well as variations of the French defense. If you want me to show you some more of it, give a like to this video, because based on your likes, your votes, I decide which videos to record next. Therefore, if you're interested, give it a like. Also, don't forget that if you're interested in joining our enrollment into the course The Secrets of Strong Players, then it's better to do it right now so that you don't miss out on this enrollment, as it's going to be closed within a few days. You can click the link below the video or on the screen and join our new group of students. I wish you best of luck, and I'll talk to you soon.